Montana Territory, spring of 1873. The wind dragged cold across the plains as Rosalind Rourke stood in front of the sheriff's office with mud on her hem and fire in her chest. "I told you what happened," she said, voice cracking from holding back too much for too long. "He lied to you. He lied to all of you." Sheriff Granger leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest like the law itself was tired of listening. "Rosalind, you have no proof, no witnesses, and no business stirring up trouble after the deal was done fair and square." "It was not fair," she snapped. "He promised land, then took my father's cattle and left us with nothing. My brother died trying to chase him down, and now, that's enough." Granger cut in, eyes hard. "You're lucky I do not throw you in a cell for slander." Rosalind stared at the floor, heart pounding, hands clenched so tight her nails dug into her palms. She had already lost her brother, her home, and every bit of security her family had ever scraped together. All because of a man named Victor Ludd who sold dreams to desperate ranchers, then vanished with the profit. Now she was being called a liar in the same town her father had helped build. She stepped out into the street, wind pulling at her dark skirt. Her boots sank into the muddy edge of the boardwalk. People were watching men outside the saloon, women gathering their children closer. They had heard what she said, and they were not going to believe her. Not without someone standing beside her. "Rosalind," she turned. A tall man with wind-roughened cheeks and broad shoulders stepped off a chestnut horse. His hat shaded light blue eyes that narrowed when he saw the tremble in her jaw. She remembered that voice, though it had been 7 years. "Lachlan Reeves." He nodded, stepping closer. "You remember. I thought you left for Wyoming." "I did," he said, voice low. "But I came back last week. Heard what happened to your family." She looked away, her throat tightening. "Then you heard they think I made it up." "I do not." Her eyes lifted to his. Something in the way he said it, firm, quiet, like it was not up for debate, moved through her like warmth crossing into a cold room. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "I was in Red Bluff last month. Saw someone trying to sell cattle with your father's brand burned half off. The man said he bought it from Victor Ludd." Rosalind stared at the paper, then back at him. "You would stand by me?" she asked. "I already am." The saloon door creaked open behind them, and Victor Ludd strolled out, slick as ever in a fine wool coat and polished boots. He stopped when he saw Rosalind, and his smile flickered. "Well," Victor drawled. "Still chasing ghosts, Miss Rourke?" Lachlan stepped in front of her, his voice calm but hard as flint. "You stole from her family." Victor raised a brow. "I made an agreement. Her brother didn't hold up his end." "You lied," Rosalind said, stepping beside Lachlan. "And I am done pretending I do not know it." Victor's lip curled, but Lachlan's presence kept him from stepping closer. "All right," Victor said, eyes flicking to the sheriff's office. "If you have something to show, go on and show it." Lachlan handed the paper to Rosalind, who walked it inside. Granger read it, silent at first, then grunted and sent a deputy to fetch the blacksmith who had seen the cattle come through. It was not fast. It was not easy. But by sundown, the truth was out and the town knew it. Victor Ludd was arrested for fraud and livestock theft, and Rosalind stood outside the jail with her shoulders squared and her hands free for the first time in months. "You did not have to come back," she said, turning to Lachlan. "I did," he said, looking at her with something warmer than pity, deeper than duty. "You never lied, Rosalind. And I remembered that about you. Always straight, always strong." She blinked, unsure how to hold the weight of his words. "You saved what is left of my family's name," she whispered. "I just stood beside you. But no one else did." He looked down at her, then slowly reached out and ran his thumb across her cheek, brushing away a tear she had not meant to show. "I should have come back sooner," he said. She shook her head. "You came when it mattered." They stood there in the quiet, the street emptying around them. Her heart beat steadier now. He had believed her when no one else had. That counted for everything. And she could feel something else taking root in her chest. Not fear, not bitterness, but something warm, something new. "Do you have a place to stay?" she asked. He smiled soft and sure. "Not yet." "You will stay with me," she said. "I have room. It is just me and my sister's boy, Nathaniel. He is 6. We lost her in the fever last year." "I would be glad to meet him," Lachlan said, voice gentle. Rosalind looked up at him, heart pounding again, but for a different reason now. This time, someone had stood at her side, and it was him. The next morning, Rosalind knelt beside the hearth, coaxing the embers back to life with a twist of dry sagebrush. The boy still slept on the straw mattress tucked against the far wall, one arm flung across the quilt she had stitched from her mother's old dresses. She let the fire catch before rising, brushing ash from her skirt and stepping into the chill that lingered in the corners of the small house. Outside, the earth was soft with thaw, and the sun had not yet cleared the low ridge to the east. She found Lachlan in the lean-to behind the house, rolling up his sleeves as he inspected the broken hinge on the chicken coop door. "You rise early," she said. He looked up, his hands already smudged with grease. One of the hens was out. "I figured it wasn't by choice." She stepped closer, arms folded against the wind. "You don't have to fix every loose board." "I don't mind." He tested the door's swing. "You've got good ground here. Fenced well enough. Just needs eyes on it." "I've only got the one pair," she said, the edge in her voice thinner than she meant it to be. "I know." She looked at his hands, the way they moved with purpose but no rush. He handled the hammer like he'd been born holding it, not just hired for it. There was a steadiness in him that made her feel less like she was balancing on the edge of something unseen. "I've a job offer," he said, not looking at her. "Patterson's place. North Pasture, near the river. He's short 2 men. Are you taking it?" I told him I'd think on it. She shifted her weight, the damp earth soft beneath her boots. "It's near enough to town." "That's what I thought." She hesitated, then stepped into the lean-to's shadow. "You don't owe me anything, Lachlan." He finally looked at her. "It's not about debt." The wind moved through the trees behind the house, bending the bare branches with a groan. Rosalind pulled her shawl tighter. "I keep thinking of how fast folks turned away," she said, voice low. "How easy it was for them to believe I'd made the whole thing up." "They didn't know you," he said. "Not really. They knew my father." Lachlan set the hammer down and leaned against the post. He was a proud man, hard on himself. He blamed himself when the herd disappeared. Spent his last weeks trying to find proof. By the time he gave up, he was already sick and didn't tell us. Lachlan didn't speak, but his silence held space for her to continue. "I buried him next to my brother, beyond the cottonwoods," she said. "Nathaniel still asks why they didn't come back." Lachlan nodded once. "When he's older, you'll tell him. I don't want him to grow up thinking truth is something people can talk over." "He won't," Lachlan said. "Not with you raising him." Rosalind looked down at her hands. "I'm tired. Not just from work. From carrying what no one else would believe." "You don't have to carry it alone." She lifted her gaze. "Then stay." "I was hoping you'd say that." Her breath caught not from surprise, but from the way his voice settled into her like the creak of a well-worn chair, familiar and solid. She reached out, brushing a curl of hair from her brow with a hand that no longer trembled. "Come inside," she said. "There's coffee on the stove and bread still warm." He followed her, pausing only to hang his coat. Inside, the boy stirred, rubbed sleep from his eyes, and sat up. Rosalind turned with a smile that reached her eyes. "Nathaniel, this is Lachlan. He'll be staying on for a while." The child blinked, then nodded solemnly. "Do you know how to fish?" Lachlan crouched beside him. "I do." "Good." Nathaniel leaned in, whispering something that made Lachlan chuckle and glance up at Rosalind. She raised an eyebrow. "What did he say?" "He's planning a trip to the creek. Says I'll need a strong stick and a quiet mouth. Then you'll get along just fine." They sat down together at the table, the sun washing the windows in soft gold. The storm of the last weeks hadn't vanished, but something had shifted. The walls of the house felt steadier. The silence, no longer empty, hummed with the beginnings of something that hadn't existed here in a long time. Trust, perhaps, or the quiet beginning of love. By mid-April, the last of the frost had pulled back from the fence posts, and the soil beneath Rosalind's boots softened into promise. The creek beyond the cottonwoods ran steady now, thawed through and busy with runoff. Birds had returned to the windbreak behind the barn, and Nathaniel had started leaving his boots by the door, muddy to the ankles and full of creek gravel. Lachlan had taken to the Patterson job 3 days a week, though he was back by dusk each time, bringing with him the smell of horses and river wind. He never knocked, just stepped into the lean-to rinse his hands, then helped with whatever she was doing without asking. Once, She found him patching the roof with fresh pine shakes he'd milled himself. Another time, he'd built a swing for Nathaniel from a length of rope and a cedar plank, hung low between two cottonwoods. That evening, Rosalind was bent over a row of early carrots, pressing the dirt firm around the green tops, when Lachlan came up the path carrying a small burlap sack. "From Mrs. Halvorson," he said. "Said she owed you for the help last winter." She brushed her hands off on her apron. "She didn't, but I'll take it." He opened the sack, revealing 2 small jars of honey and a folded gingham cloth. "Said to tell you the bees came through the cold better than she expected." Rosalind smiled, tucking the cloth under her arm. "She always said bees know things we don't." Lachlan looked out across the yard, where Nathaniel was crouched beside the swing, poking at a trail of ants with a twig. "He's different now." Rosalind followed his gaze. "He sleeps through the night. Talks more, too. Not always sense, but enough." He was quiet a moment, then stepped toward the fence. "I've been thinking." She waited. "I've got a small plot north of the river. Land I bought near Sweetgrass Hills before I ever came back this way. Just a cabin and a well, but it's good ground." Rosalind straightened slowly. "You were planning to settle?" "I was. Never got to it." She wiped a smudge of soil from her cheek with the heel of her hand. "Why tell me now?" "Because I'd rather build something here." Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. "I don't need much," he said, turning toward her. "But I need it to be honest. And I need it to be with someone who doesn't flinch when things break down or go quiet." She picked up the honeycomb cloth and folded it tighter. "And you think that's me?" "I know it is." The wind pushed through the grass, carrying the scent of turned soil and creek water. Nathaniel stood now, stick forgotten, watching a hawk circle high above the trees. Rosalind stepped closer. "I've had to learn how to stand still when I wanted to run. That's what it's been, more than anything, standing still in the hard parts. I've seen you do it." She looked up at him then, her voice low but steady. "I want something that holds." Lachlan reached out, not urgent, just certain. His fingers closed gently around hers. "So do I." The moment stretched between them, quiet as dusk settling in a hollow. Nothing rushed, nothing undone. Just 2 people who had endured enough to know what mattered when it came. Rosalind pressed her other hand over his. "Come inside. I've got stew warming and enough bread for you and the boy both." He nodded, not letting go. "I'll build a pen for the goats tomorrow." Her voice softened. "They'll like that." And as they walked back toward the house, Nathaniel running ahead, calling out something about the hawk's shadow on the barn roof, Rosalind felt something long buried begin to lift inside her. Not hope. Hope was too new a word. What she felt was steadiness, earned and quiet, and finally shared. The wild plum trees behind the shed had started to bud when Rosalind saw Samuel Talbot ride into the yard. She was tending to the wash, sleeves rolled up, when the sound of hooves brought her upright, wet laundry clutched in her arms. Nathaniel stood near the fence, watching the stranger dismount. Talbot swung down from his gelding with the same loose swagger he'd had years back, though there was gray in his beard now and a stiffness to his left leg she didn't remember. "Rosie," he said, tipping his hat. "That's not my name," she answered, hanging the damp shirt over the line without looking at him. "Didn't reckon it was any more," he said, glancing toward the house. "Heard what happened. Thought I'd check in." Nathaniel took a step back, squinting up at him. Rosalind moved between them without thinking. "You're late by 3 years," she said. "A letter might have done." Talbot shifted, eyes scanning the yard. "Didn't figure you'd want to read anything from me. Still thought you ought to know I saw Lud and Helena last fall. Before it all came down. You didn't think to tell me then?" "I didn't know what he was up to." Rosalind wiped her hands on her apron, jaw tight. "You knew what kind of man he was." Talbot didn't argue. Instead, he looked toward the barn, where Lachlan had just stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag, his eyes sharp and steady as they met Talbot's. "Friend of yours?" Lachlan asked, coming up beside her. "No," she said. Talbot raised a brow. "Didn't expect to be replaced so quick." Rosalind didn't answer that, but Lachlan did. She wasn't waiting on someone who left without a word. Talbot's mouth pressed into a line. "I didn't come to stir trouble." "Then you're free to ride on," Rosalind said. "There's nothing for you here." Nathaniel tugged at her skirt. "Is he a bad man?" She looked down at him. "He made choices that don't belong to us anymore." With a nod that held more weight than apology, Talbot stepped back to his horse. You were always harder than I gave you credit for. I was always exactly what I needed to be, she said. He mounted and turned, riding out without another word. The dust settled behind him, and silence stretched again across the yard. Lachlan glanced toward her. You all right? Just surprised, she said. He was my brother's friend. We thought he went east after the war. Turns out he just went quiet. Lachlan didn't press. He only reached for the last of the shirts and clipped it beside hers. Was that true about Helena? He asked. Doesn't matter now, she said. Lud's in custody. The truths already walked out into the light. Nathaniel was chasing a grasshopper near the porch steps, barefoot and grinning. Rosalind watched him a moment before speaking again. I'm not used to people coming back, she said. Not like you did. I didn't come back, Lachlan said. I came home. They stood a while longer by the line, the scent of sun-warmed cloth rising between them. The wind picked up, catching the hem of her apron and the edge of his shirt. Everything that had tried to take from her had failed. Everything that remained was hers because she had chosen it. Later that evening, when she brought out the ledger she used to track seed orders and coop repairs, Lachlan sat beside her on the porch step, his knee brushing hers. You've been quiet, she said. I was thinking, he replied, handing her a folded page. I asked Patterson if I could trade my pay for lumber. He agreed. She unfolded it. Why lumber? For a second room. I figured Nathaniel's getting too big to sleep in the kitchen corner, and I thought maybe you'd want a door that shuts. She looked at him, the ledger forgotten in her lap. You're building onto the house. If you'll have it. The words settled into her like a finished seemed familiar, whole, something that wouldn't pull loose. I'll have it, she said. Lachlan leaned back against the porch post, eyes on the darkening sky. Then we'll start after the frost breaks for good. And when she reached for his hand, she didn't have to wonder if he'd pull away. He laced their fingers together, and she held on, steady as the stars beginning to blink through the dusk. The new room took 6 days to frame, another 3 to seal tight against spring rain. Lachlan worked between his days at Patterson's, his hands steady with each plane and nail. Rosalind kept the kettle warm and the meals hot, but she didn't hover. She watched from the porch sometimes, Nathaniel curled in her lap with a book, the boy asking questions about the angles of the roof, the smell of fresh-cut pine, the way a wall knew when it was finished. They didn't speak much during the building. It wasn't needed. The rhythm of it, the hammer, the saw, the shared glances held more truth than words could stretch around. When the first storm of May passed through, heavy and cold with sleet, they stood inside the new room, the lantern throwing soft light across the raw plank walls. Rosalind ran her fingertips along the window frame Lachlan had carved by hand. You left space for lace curtains. I figured you'd want to decide what goes there. She turned to face him, her voice quiet. You built this without asking for anything back. I didn't need to, he said. She stepped closer, close enough to see the pale scar above his collarbone, the one that hadn't been there 7 years ago. You carry your own losses, she said. You've never said it, but I see the weight in you. He looked down for a long moment. The land I bought near Sweetgrass Hills, it was meant for someone else. A woman I courted before the war. She didn't wait. I would have, Rosalind said, voice steady. He met her eyes, and something in his jaw eased. I think you would have. She reached for his hand, not tentative now. We could marry before summer. Quietly. Just here, with Nathaniel and the preacher. His fingers closed around hers. Warm, sure. That's what I hoped. They wed beneath the cottonwoods, just past the graves where her father and brother lay. The preacher came from town, a quiet man with tobacco-stained fingers and a voice like gravel. Nathaniel wore a clean shirt and carried wildflowers he'd picked himself. Patterson came too, driving in with his wife and a basket of preserves. No one else was needed. Rosalind wore a dress she'd sewn from muslin she'd hidden away since the year her sister died. She didn't weep when the vows were spoken. Neither did Lachlan. But when he took her hand in his, there was a stillness between them that stretched deep and wide, like the land itself had paused to listen. They danced in the yard that night, just the 3 of them beneath a sky lit with stars. Lachlan played a tune on the fiddle Patterson had brought along, and Nathaniel clapped along, barefoot, his cheeks red with laughter. Later, after the boy had fallen asleep in the new room and the fire had burned low, Lachlan and Rosalind sat near the hearth, shoulders touching. You've made this into something whole, she said. No, he replied. We did. She leaned into him, her voice a whisper now. I never thought I'd have this. Not after everything that went. You didn't lose the part that matters, he said. You kept your heart. She turned her face toward his, and when their lips met, it wasn't hurried or uncertain. It was the kind of kiss that settled deep, the kind that felt like a place to rest. They didn't rush to bed that night. They sat long after the flames turned to embers, her head on his shoulder, his hand resting over hers. The wind carried the scent of new grass through the open window, and the house no longer felt borrowed by sorrow. It was theirs now, every board of it. By the time the wheat was shoulder-high, Lachlan had quit the Patterson job for good. The land behind the house bore rows of beans and squash, and they traded eggs for milk with a neighbor who passed by each Wednesday. Nathaniel started reading aloud on his own, his voice strong even when the words were new to him. One morning, Rosalind stood at the edge of the field, her hand resting on the curve of her belly, the sun warm against her neck. Lachlan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist without a word. She leaned back into him, smiling at the sound of Nathaniel laughing with the goats. He wants a sister, she said. We'll see what we can do. They stayed like that for a while, the wind brushing past them, the land green and wide in every direction. In time, the boy would grow taller and the baby would come. The house would need more shelves, more blankets, more hands. But for now, with the spring sun high and the earth steady beneath their feet, there was nothing missing. They had each other. They had peace. And they had the quiet certainty that whatever came next, they would meet it together.